A minute, I'd like, if he will join us, to allow General Lee to come and talk about the love of his life and those beautiful ladies that he had an opportunity, a few of them, that he had to meet. So if you will, I need to step away a second and return, and hopefully General Robert E. Lee will be with us. God knows my wife did not like this war. She was totally against the war. In fact, she's a very strong unionist. You see my wife? I'm sorry, I did not introduce my wife. Her name is Mary. She is a Custis, but she is so enthralled with the Washington clan because, you see, she is really the great-granddaughter of Martha Washington. George Washington's adopted great-granddaughter. And when George died, of course, his only son, my father-in-law inherited everything he had. And then my darling wife, upon his demise in 1857, received everything that belonged to George Washington. Some people said that I fell in love with George Washington. In a sense, that may be true, but I fell in love with the woman who so represented the strong values that George Washington fought and founded this country upon. She was my rock, and boy did she have tenacity. I remember once, good flag bearer, I remember once, good general, a newspaper reporter was talking to me, and he said, in front of my wife, who was in a rolling chair, he said, General, we cannot help but notice you are always surrounded by lovely ladies. And I kind of looked over at her and thought quick on my feet, and I said, sir, you have seen my army. Which company had you prefer? Of course, there's the ladies. And she kind of nodded and let me go, but she had tenacity of spirit. She loved her home. You see, she lived in Arlington. She had 1,100-acre beautiful plantation, and she also had Shirley that she inherited through her Fitzhugh connection. And then she had Roanoke, 4,000 plus acres. The White House plantation that my son now owns. A lot of islands. So she had a lot. And people say, General Lee, you gave up so much. I beg to differ. My wife gave up everything. For you see, we were at the apex of the South. There was a river that ran between Washington City and our hill. This was the South, and this was the heart of the North. And my wife fully knew that if I went with the South, it would cost her everything. Everything that she loved. And we talked. And I do remember and recall very vividly the day that I was called upon after hearing about Fort Sumter. You see, I had come home from Texas. That's what second Texas was. I love it. And I was home in Arlington, and there's a knock on the door. And it was a young courier, and he gave me a message. He didn't put it in my hat, but he gave me a message. And on that paper, I looked at it, and I kind of walked up because I knew what was on it. And my lovely wife in a rolling chair. We've been married 30 plus years, and she could read me better than I could read myself. And she looked at me and said, Mr. Lee, now, do you all have pet names for each other? Mine was Mims, and she called me her captain and all these, but when it was Mr. Lee and Miss Custis, I knew that it was fairly serious. And she said, Mr. Lee, I see that you're in trouble. And I said, yes. Our worst fears are realized. And I looked at it, already knowing its content. And I asked my horse to be saddled. A little great mare I brought back from the Mexican War. Her name was Darling Grace. I got on Darling Grace and went down there. It was to meet the President of the United States, a newly elected man who had promoted me to colonel. And there's rumors that this new president I had never met, his name was Jefferson Davis, who I want to say. His name was Abraham Lincoln. And he was busy raising money, raising troops to invade the South. They said he was going to promote me to a general. And when I met with my distant cousin, Mr. Blair, Francis Preston Blair said, "Sir, on behalf of the President of the United States, I'm hereby authorized to offer you complete command of the Army of the Potomac." Complete command. Do you know what that means? This is something that my beloved mother had wanted me to do. You see, to redeem the good name of my father, the good name of the Lees, for two of my great uncles had signed the Declaration of Independence. My father had been governor for 3 years. He'd been a legislator. He'd been a war hero for 7 years. He even gave the eulogy for George Washington. Yet he had a gambling problem and land speculation and lost everything, went to debtor's prison. And when they came out, he was different. I was around 3, but I remember. And he came against the war that was coming of 1812, to the point that there was a paper known as the Baltimore that was also against the war. It was known as Republican. It had been in Baltimore, and then they moved it to Georgetown. And my father went there to try to bring some sense to this terrible equation. Well, the mob came and ensued into a terrible fight where actually it was he was a meat man dealing with a butcher, and he had a meat cleaver, wooden mallet, and he knocked my father down. They said that they poured hot wax in his ears and even tried to cut off his nose. And when he came out from that terrible time, he left never more to come back. And I felt it was my duty, as my mother said, to redeem the wondrous name of the Lees and the Carter and the Hills, all the connection that we had. Well, I went home, and that lady who knows me better than anybody met me at the door. And she looked at me, and I looked at her, and I begged leave to go upstairs. And that wonderful woman, she captured in her journal, and she said, I could hear my beloved husband pacing back and forth in the hallway upstairs. And at one point he fell to his knees and he screamed out, "Dear God, take this from our country. Take this from our people. Take this from me, because I'm unworthy to serve." And when he came down the stairs, as if there was a great effusion of blood had come from his eyes. But I saw in his countenance a reserve, nay, a peace. And I need not ask the answer, for I saw it in his being. And the house of Lee was the house of the dead.